Greetings, everybody. Hope you're doing very well this evening. I think we're going to start immediately. If people come in, they come in. But let's, I think, crack on. We are officially beginning with the last learning unit of the semester and of the year. So you're basically right at the end of your year of study. So they've left us with a very interesting text to finish up with. It is, I think, it's the only novel of the semester. You will have done another novel in first semester. You would have done the Lewis Carroll's Adventures of Alice in Wonderland. So you'll know that a novel as a thing, as an object, or as a medium for telling a story is a long piece of prose fiction, right? So it has different, as I'll explain to you this evening and in other classes too, it has different features and expectations and kind of rules or conventions than, say, poetry does. And the way I'm going to teach this book to you, I think, is, because we only have 2 live classes together and the opportunity just to have 2 short recordings either side of that, I'm going to kind of teach you the book from a sort of a bird's eye view. We're not going to cover absolutely everything about it. We can't do, say, a close reading of every chapter. So kind of like with Ginsberg's Howl, we're going to look at it from a thematic and theory perspective to see what it is that the writer is trying to do, how he does it, and what it is that he's trying to communicate to us in a slightly unusual way. So the book is unusual. It's got kind of a quirky title, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. The author is Mark Haddon. So already from the title, we have a kind of a provocative, quirky name of the book. It's not often that you see a book with kind of a long title like that. The adjective curious kind of piques your interest a little bit. It suggests already what kind of a genre it's in, maybe a bit of a sort of mystery / detective genre, because there's a curious incident. It's also a title that kind of harks back to The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sherlock Holmes, which is the text and story you'll be familiar with from also having covered it in first semester. So there's a little connection for you to establish already. This is a murder mystery about a dog, but not told from the perspective of a dog, actually told from the perspective of a highly unusual narrator. And like I said, the book is quite quirky, eccentric, strange. It's not really told in the way that a normal, quote-unquote, normal, conventional novel is taught. Usually a novel kind of has a nice, clear beginning, middle, and an end, a storyline, recognizable narrator or narrators and characters. But this book is different. It even looks different on the page. So because I'm not really with you in person here, it might be a little bit hard for me to communicate some of the more visual aspects of the book. But if you just open up and flip through, I'm sure you've been reading it already as well, you'll notice that the book is not just a work of prose, of writing or text. It's actually also got quite a lot of diagrams, pictures or pictograms in it, as well as other features like numbers and charts, what we would now call emojis, smiley, unhappy faces at some points, pictures of animals and cows. Changing of font sometimes happens too. The font itself that the book is written in my copy anyway, is kind of also an unusual choice for a book, in that it's printed in a sans serif. So it kind of looks as though somebody wrote it on a Word document and just wrote in the default font setting on Microsoft Word. So it's got this kind of unusual look on the page. All of these things are important features of the book, and then also choices, the things that the writer, Mark Haddon, is trying to communicate to us about, not just about what happens in the story, but also about the tone of the story, the themes of the story, all of which also goes to the most important thing about this book, which is the person who's telling the story, whose name is Christopher Boone. He is 15 years old, and he's telling us a story about how he's trying to solve a murder, as he sees it, of his neighbor's dog. But Christopher is very unusual by the standards of our of what we expect, I suppose, from characters in a book and from narrators in a book. The book was published, like I said, in 2003. Let me actually just go back and stick to this slide here quickly. It was published in 2003, and it is about, like I said, Christopher Boone trying to solve this mystery. But what makes him unusual is that, and as you'll read in the blurb, the summary in the back of the book, this is a boy who has Asperger's syndrome. Although I'm not really sure if at any point in the book that's directly said, but I think we can infer that he is in some sense on the spectrum. And I gave you a brief ice task to do that kind of prepped you for this fact about the book, is that there's something about Christopher that is a bit odd or eccentric or off kilter. And it is that he's on the spectrum. I don't exactly know what his condition would be explained as, and so we'll get to the slide later, but I gave you the opportunity to think for yourself, what do you think it is that's actually going on with him? Because it's very important to understand his perspective through the book and how his perspective builds out the whole world that is being created for us in the story. And it's a highly unusual world because we see this world through the eyes of Christopher, and we'll talk a little bit more about how his condition shapes that perspective. But you'll notice quite immediately that the book, like the first thing you actually see in the book is not really a word. The story actually begins with a number. Chapter 1 is not called chapter 1. So if you open up your book to page 1, you'll notice, first of all, that chapter 1 is not called chapter 1. It's actually called just 2. It's called chapter 2. So where's chapter 1? Well, chapter 1 doesn't exist at all. If you go to the next page, you'll see that the next page is called chapter 3. Okay, that makes us, at least we're working chronologically here. But then the next chapter is chapter 5, followed by chapter 7, followed by chapter 11, then 13, 17, 19, 23, 29, and so on. And these numbers are all special numbers. They're what you would call prime numbers. Now, there's not actually going to be that much mathematics involved in this module. Don't worry, you're sticking with English literature here, but you do need to kind of grasp the concept of what a prime number is. And anybody who did a little bit of maths at school, myself included, can probably remember back to what a prime number is. In short, prime number is any natural number, like a whole number, right? Not 2.2 or 3.7, that a whole number, a natural number, an integer, that is a product of two smaller natural numbers, but only two. In other words, you can only divide it by 1 and itself. So 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17. You can only divide them by themselves or by 1, right? And those are kind of, we call those prime numbers because they're quite special numbers. And the amazing thing about prime numbers is that they actually can get pretty big, right? Amazingly enough. So here's just for your own kind of interest and edification, here's a table that lists the first 1,000 primes. And this just takes us all the way up to 1,069. But primes actually get bigger than that. Here is the current record for the biggest prime number we know. The record is currently held by a number called, I don't even know how to say this, 2 to the power of 82,589,933 minus 1. Yeah, okay, I don't really know how to say that, but I think you get the idea. It's a large number. It's so large that it has to be expressed with the power to about 82 million, right? So it's got 24 1,862,048 digits. And it actually wasn't even discovered by a human being. It was discovered by a thing called GIMPS in 2018, which is a computer program that they designed to try and work out the highest prime. These are the first 120 digits of it. It then skips about 24 million other digits, and there's the last 120 afterwards. So that's an enormous number. That's a number that can only be divided by itself and by 1, which is kind of crazy when you think about how many numbers are divisible by multiple other numbers, divisible by 3, 2, 3, just divisible by 2. Most numbers are divisible by 2 without producing a fraction, or 3 or 4 or 5, so to find a prime number is like absolutely is regarded as a miracle now. It's an amazing thing. And you have all these people who are trying to design software and maybe now using AI to try and discover newer, even bigger primes. But as of September 24, this prime number still holds the record and has done so for more than 6 years, longer than any other prime since. And numbers are like fascinating things. When you just think about a number, it makes you also think of mathematics, of course. And what is mathematics? Mathematics it's like a language or a code of its own that throws up all kinds of very useful things for us. It helps us to build things, understand things, work things out. And in a way, therefore, maths as a language or a system, you could say is simultaneously like a whole world of symbols that stand in for reality, right? But at the same time, maths is also completely true. It's a system, it's a framework, but it's not like a construct. It's not a false construct. It's a real thing that correlates perfectly to reality, and we kind of all just accept that that is so. For example, having an understanding of mathematics allows us to build and fly airplanes, right? And you trust mathematics so much that you are willing to get on that airplane and have it fly you somewhere from one place to another, knowing that it will reliably get you to a destination safely. I mean, most of the time, safely. But you would never get on an airplane if that airplane's autopilot were programmed to believe that 2 + 2 = 5. Right? You would never climb on that airplane because it would crash into a mountain probably within 5 minutes. So we all kind of instinctively accept that 2 + 2 is not 5. 2 + 2 is 4. It cannot be anything but 4. And that is just the iron law of the universe. There can be no negotiation. That is just what it is. And maths, even though it's a language, doesn't work in the way that words work. Words also stand in for reality, but they're much more fluid. They change. They have different connotations depending on how they're used. And we also use them to create things like metaphors, similes, figurative language, right? We use words. Words in a way are a construct, unlike numbers and maths, which is like part of the iron law of how the universe works. Numbers are more kind of much more subjective and changeable and unreliable. Maths is constant. It's predictable. It's formulaic. And one of the ways you learn maths is through formula, right? And techniques, how to use techniques and formula to achieve a predictable result again and again and again, endlessly replicatable. Whereas words change, and the way we use them is not actually to capture and hold down reality, but rather to express something figurative or metaphorical. And I'm going to all these lengths to differentiate between the two, because in the book, we have a combination of numbers and words very often. The character loves maths, loves numbers, and is fascinated by prime numbers. Christopher is fascinated by them because being on the spectrum, numbers, mathematics, and all the things that go with it are things that are predictable and, in a sense, easy to use because they are predictable. They're logical, they're rigid, they stay the same. What's difficult for him to understand is words, metaphors, allegories, how people speak, tone, emotion, subjectivity. These are things that are like a void to him, like a blank, just a blank, a brick wall. He doesn't get that stuff. The stuff of human affairs and social life is to him the mystery. For us, numbers and maths can be like a thing we are still sometimes. I haven't done maths in like 20 years, but sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night with a cold sweat, having just had a dream about my matric higher grade trigonometry paper and how terribly it went when I was 18. It still isn't something that intimidates me and is a mystery. I don't really understand, never really understood what I was doing. But for Christopher, it's the reverse, where words, allegory, poetry, jokes, symbolic language, that stuff fills him with dread. And immediately, that's a very odd combination of things to put together in a novel, because a novel obviously is something built out of language and words and metaphors, similes, allusions, and other things that emerge out of that metaphorical, human, fluid, subjective framework that it operates under, unlike maths. But here we have a character to whom all that stuff is actually a mystery, and yet he's telling us his whole life story in that form, right? Because he has to, because maths doesn't quite get him there. So that's an odd combination in the book, and that's why I'm kind of going to some lengths to point it out as being something to think about in the book. Note those chapter numbers. Christopher, simply put, in the book is very literal, and you don't get anything more literal than maths, than numbers. Maths is a code that we draw from the laws of material reality, and therefore is formulaic, constant, reliable, which is in stark contrast to human affairs, which are fickle, and which are often, the way we communicate is coded in metaphor. Even when you're not consciously using a metaphor, or when you're not consciously, you don't think you're consciously hearing one, very often the way we speak to each other and address each other is in the form of metaphor. Just to say something like, that was so funny, I was laughing my head off at that joke he told early on. I couldn't believe it. I fell off my chair. It was so funny. We don't mean that literally. We mean that it's part of our need to explain something by turning it into a story, using exaggeration, emotion, and hyperbole to keep somebody's interest. But those things to Christopher, when he hears you say something like that, I laughed my head off, he actually has to take a beat and remind himself that you didn't literally laugh until your head detached itself from your neck, fell off, and rolled along the ground, right? He doesn't immediately know that. He doesn't exist in the world in that way. And indeed, we know this is true because he tells us very directly that he doesn't understand that approach. To him, it's a minefield, and it's something that he has to, over the course of his life, something that he has to navigate. In an interesting way, for example, that he tells us this is, if you would go, I'm going to jump around a little bit in the book, because I'm just sort of picking out things that suit what I'm saying to you right now about like I said, the bird's eye view of the book. So if you hop to page 20, which is in chapter 29, so you see, because he's using prime numbers, the size of the number actually often is larger than the page numbers it's on. So you also get this kind of strange feeling of the book being a bit weird and curious. The book itself is curious. It's like a strange object. On page 20, he says, talking about this stuff, metaphors and his inability to understand them, he tells us, my name is a metaphor. It means carrying Christ, and it comes from the Greek words, which I can't pronounce, but it's probably like Christos. I think that's what that says, Christos. I'm not too sure, but I think so, which means Jesus Christ. And I think that is Ferelv. And it was the name given to Saint Christopher because he carried Jesus across a river. This makes you wonder what he was called before he carried Christ across a river. He wasn't called anything because this is an apocryphal story, which means that it is a lie too. Mother used to say that it meant Christopher was a nice name because it was a story about being kind and helpful. But I do not want my name to mean a story about being kind and helpful. I want my name to mean me. So just reading that, you kind of get a nice, like a flavor of Christopher as a person. He's very blunt. He's very direct, very literal. His name, like a lot of our names, are actually like metaphors or they mean something else. And even if you look at the word metaphor, if you look at the word there, metaphor, it ends with the, sorry, I'm just checking something here. It ends with the O-P-H-O-R, right? If you look at the word Christopher, it's also got that almost the same spelling. So to carry a cross, that aphor means to carry a cross. Just like a metaphor is when you borrow one meaning from another word or idea, and you carry it across from one word, one image, one idea to another one. You carry it over, right? So his very name is something that actually doesn't really fit with him because he's not somebody who can understand that carrying over process from one thing to another. He only sees it as two different things. He doesn't put the two things together to make a connection. And we'll see this throughout the book where Christopher is very, very adept and extremely intelligent and at remembering things and at noticing everything around him, right? And knowing, but he sees everything as like a disparate part. He doesn't see them as all being connected together in some way. They're all different bits and pieces that he can see clearly and remember in detail, but he struggles to tie things together. And that again makes for a very odd kind of a book because he doesn't know how to tell the story he needs to tell you. All he's kind of got at his disposal is this honesty, this literalness, and this bluntness. And he is the one quite explicitly telling us the story. He's writing the story before us as well, as he tells us to. He's actually creating the book as it's unfolding. He's the one writing it on a computer at home. That's kind of maybe what explains the font choice, because it's like it's just a regular boring default Arial, I think, that he's picked on his laptop or on his computer. So Christopher, the more you read, the more you start to see these odd ways he has of putting the book together. Again, the story usually wants to just flow from a beginning, middle, and an end, but this is not a book that flows. It will begin in the story, then the story will stop, and Christopher will write like a little mini essay about his life or about himself. Then that will stop, and then the story will pick up again. Then we switch back to this other mode of him talking about his life, which seems to be unconnected to the actual story he wants to tell us. So you've got this strange, disorientating experience where the teller of the story, the narrator, is not unreliable necessarily, but is a highly unusual narrator for a novel to have, because a novel as I'll show you later, is supposed to, I put supposed to in quotation marks, is supposed to follow a certain form and certain conventions in order to make sense. But Mark Haddon, through this character of Christopher, is always giving us the story in an unusual form and convention that seems to go against the rules in an odd way, which we will unpack a bit tonight and later on too. So the book, despite all this sort of serious way I'm busy talking about it, it also has a really cool story and a plot behind it. The main premise, as captured in the title, is that Christopher, this young kid, is trying to solve the mystery of who killed his neighbor's dog. The dog's name is Wellington. It was a poodle, and right at the beginning of the book, on the first page, actually, the story begins right there in chapter 2, the first chapter. It was 7 minutes after midnight. He writes, "The dog was lying on the grass in the middle of the lawn in front of Mrs. Shear's house. Its eyes were closed. It looked as if it was running on its side, the way dogs run when they think they are chasing a cat in a dream. But the dog was not running or asleep. The dog was dead. There was a garden fork sticking out of the dog. The points of the fork must have gone all the way through the dog and into the ground because the fork had not fallen over. I decided that the dog was probably killed with the fork because I could not see any other wounds in the dog, and I do not think you would stick a garden fork into a dog after it had died for some other reason, like cancer, for example, or a road accident. But I could not be certain about this." So the story begins like right in the middle of this action and of the events, right? We would call that, as a storytelling technique, we'd call that I'm just going to write this in the comments here quickly. In medias res. Hopefully you can all see that. In medias res means to begin in the middle of events, to begin in the middle of things, to start without any context, without any explanation. You know, here we don't know where the story is set. We don't know what year we are in. We don't know whose voice this is, who's telling us the story. We have no idea of the characters. We just know some very strange details that it's 7 minutes after midnight. People don't really talk that way. You know, when we tell each other the time, we don't say, "Oh, it's 7 minutes past midnight." We usually say, it's 5 past midnight, or it's midnight. We can be very inexact with the time, especially in South Africa, where we are kind of loosey-goosey with times and so on. But here he's very precise. He's very, very exact. And just those first few words tells us a lot about the character we're dealing with. We're somebody who is kind of fixed and rigid, who wants to be very precise and very exact. And then he goes on to describe this, what is like a murder scene. You know, and many detective shows and thrillers begin with somebody discovering a dead body, right? It's usually the inciting incident, the thing that gets the story and the mystery going. Somebody's jogging in the park and stumbles over a dead person with a knife in their eyeball or something like that. And so the mystery begins to try and work out who the killer is. And we move from that point, from A to B to C to D, until eventually the killer is found and justice is brought, and so the world is set to rights again. It's a very formulaic thing, by the way, a detective story. It has to have certain features. It has to move usually in one direction, have certain kind of characters and events in a way to kind of keep the reader reading or the watcher watching, all the while giving away little clues and insights and breakthroughs and red herrings, you know, leading you down the wrong path, until eventually, right at the end, the secret is revealed and the sense of satisfaction in working it out is delivered, and also a bigger satisfaction that the bad guy has been caught and justice has been restored in the world and goodness prevails. And that is a vehicle for delivering that same idea over and over again, which we find very satisfying as viewers. The mystery solved, the puzzle cracked, goodness wins out over bad in the end. As you might imagine, because this book as I've been saying to you, is a complicated and unusual, curious one, that formula is not going to be delivered in the way you expect. It's going to be part of the book, but the way Mark Haddon uses it as a framework or uses it as a form to tell this particular story is non-formulaic, and it's got a non-standard form, right? And so it makes the book not actually about the mystery of who killed the dog. That's kind of a secondary, superficial thing going on in the book, actually. In truth, the bigger mystery is, who is Christopher and what is going on in his life? Because that's where we, the reader, kind of become a detective about what is actually up with Christopher. Who is this kid? Why is he telling us a story? And we will kind of want to know what it is that's going on in his highly unusual life, because he seems so strange, right? That was kind of why I made you do that little ice task for me, which is what the writer's making you do too, is trying to kind of crack the mystery of Christopher. And he himself, while interested in that murder mystery of the dog, he's interested also in trying to solve the world, like the mystery of the world to him, because it's a world he doesn't really know how to navigate. But it's all kind of wrapped up in this Sherlock Holmes style story where we have a character, a detective, trying to solve a murder. And as I said, it's a formula. Usually, very often, it's a formula. What else is a formula? A maths problem is a formula. It's a process of deduction, following certain rules, following the recipe, and arriving reliably at a desired conclusion, right? The thing is that human events, like reality, the world we live in, is not a detective story. And life, society is not mathematical, it doesn't have mathematical rules. And so Christopher finds himself navigating this world he actually doesn't understand. It doesn't work to treat the world as a puzzle like he wants to, because the world is not a puzzle. Think of puzzles that you do, a jigsaw puzzle, a thousand piece jigsaw puzzle. There's a way you can start the puzzle on the table and slowly build it up reliably. Or another puzzle, I'm looking at one right now on my bookshelf here, a puzzle I've never been able to finish, which is a Rubik's Cube. I think I started that Rubik's Cube like 4 years ago, and it's still sadly, every side is still sadly multicolored and mocking me from a distance. I've never been able to do it. All I know is that the center block, the color of the center block is the color that side will be. So that's your target color for each side. And then I go and watch YouTube, like, how do you do a Rubik's Cube? And you got guys solving the puzzle in, like, I think the world record is something like 7 seconds or something insane like that, because it doesn't follow, a Rubik's Cube doesn't follow a formula, it follows an algorithm. So if you know the algorithm, the moves that you've got to make in sequence, it will be solved quickly. So you kind of have to memorize the sequence, but then also have very good kind of finger dexterity. But a puzzle it's something that exists outside of human life. Just because you can't do puzzles well doesn't mean that you're stupid, right? That's just me telling myself not to feel stupid because I can't finish a Rubik's Cube, probably. But just because you can't do puzzles doesn't mean that you're done. And the other way is true as well. Just because you are only kind of good at solving puzzles and maths doesn't mean that you're sort of not intelligent. They're just different kinds of intelligence, I suppose. The other important thing to mention is the book was published in 2003. 21 years later, in the year 2024, we have a very, very different understanding of what it means to be on the spectrum, right? What that is, what it means to have autism, what it means to have Asperger's. In 2003, it was known, we're right, people kind of knew about it, but it wasn't something that was part of the sort of the kind of the national conversation or something that was part of mainstream discussion. Now it is, and we kind of everybody, even laymen, know how to recognize somebody who might be on the spectrum. And we know that the spectrum is, it's a spectrum. It's a wide possible range of conditions and degrees of the condition. It's not the same thing for every single person. Some people who are on the spectrum are profoundly non-verbal, for example. They don't speak. Others are slightly non-verbal. Others, you might not even know that they're on the spectrum. So it's like it's a wide range of possible expressions of this thing. But back in 2003 or so, and when Mark Haddon would have been writing the book in the early 2000s, these ideas were not part of a broader conversation or part of a broader public knowledge. People just didn't really know. So you've got to kind of imagine this book landing as it did, I guess, to a lot of curiosity, to use that word again. Nobody had ever written a book from this particular perspective before. Or maybe they had, but not in this exact way, from the perspective of a child, right? And I've sort of read up about it, and the book, it might say so somewhere on your edition too, but this book is a huge international bestseller. It sold millions of copies over the last 2 decades. They've turned it into, the last few years, it's been turned into a play in the West End. You can catch little snippets of it online on YouTube, which has been a massive success as well. So the book is extremely popular, and people are just kind of have been fascinated by this. There's also some criticism that he gets the condition wrong, that this isn't actually what it's like to be autistic. I'm not too sure about that. I don't know. But that's one of the perspectives other people have had. I think a lot of you, well, you're all studying psychology this year, so maybe some of these things have come up. And if you choose to stick with psychology, I guess you'll soon be more expert than I am in this stuff. But it's what we would now call neurodivergence, I suppose. Like you get kind of typical sorts of neurological conditions. That's not the right word, but neurodivergent, I just mean somebody who's atypical in their cognitive abilities in some way. And it's a broad range of different things. But just to kind of fill you in on the context, that I think the context has changed, probably because books like this exist. It puts it into the conversation. People learn about it, and we become smarter at understanding what it was, that our knowledge of these conditions actually begins to overtake what the book gets right and what it gets wrong. Okay, so I gave you that little activity to diagnose Christopher, just to think about what he did, because this is very important for his character. Like, what is it that, what does he do? What's interesting about him? What is it that kind of is unusual? I asked you to look at some of these things, like here's the neurodivergent umbrella. Things you might have seen about him were that he has ADHD, which I think I might actually have these days too. Autism, bipolar. I don't think he's bipolar, but he might have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, which is, it's not like you like to have a tidy desk or you like to arrange things just so, although he does like to do that. For example, he will, whenever he eats food, the different foods on his plate can't touch one another. Right, they all have to be separate. If one touches the other, he can't eat it, so he throws it away. He doesn't like eating yellow food or brown food. He refuses to eat that. But OCD is kind of different, that it's more that you begin to fixate on things, that you begin to obsess over things that might not be true, or things that are trivial, right? And Christopher, the whole story actually is that he is obsessing over this dead dog that he discovers in his neighbor's garden, and he becomes fixated, obsessed, and he's compelled to try and solve the mystery of what actually happened here. But I mean, if, say, a quote unquote ordinary person were to make a grisly discovery like that, then we would probably say, oh, that's awful, and kind of write it off and carry on with our lives and not try to work out who did it, right? But Christopher is totally the opposite. He fixates on it, and that becomes the plot of the story. But like I say, that's the main plot. But there's a second, more complicated and elusive plot going on underneath it, which the first allows us, the reader, a way into understanding the teller of the story. So, I was looking at some of your IceTask contributions. This was the main thing that stuck out, that a lot of you recognize Christopher as having ADS, which is autism spectrum disorder, which seems to be the most common one, which is, these are some of the what would you call them? I guess you would call them symptoms or behavioral symptoms that Christopher displays throughout the book. Is that he has a difficulty with complex emotions. He is unable to see the world from the viewpoint of others. Specifically, is unable to feel what other people feel. That was what you might call empathy or sympathy, where you're able to, judging by the look on somebody's face or the tone of voice they tell you something in, or their word choice, you're able to work out what their mood is. We have a theory of mind. I'm able to see something from another person's perspective and say, geez, I was able to evaluate and judge how they were feeling based on their body language or something like that. And early on in the book, we see him, he's got this teacher at his special needs school. His name is Siobhan, and she draws these pictures basically of smiley faces, and Siobhan uses these to explain to him what somebody's face would look like when they're sad or when they're happy. And Christopher's just about able to work it out, but it becomes increasingly difficult when the faces have a more complicated expression on them. Like if you look, this is all happening on page 2 of the book. She drew some other pictures, and he gives us these ones that are like more like, one is sort of got a happy smile, but the eyebrows are arched down to indicate anger. So Christopher sees happy and angry together, and he can't work out that might mean something like, somebody's enjoying the suffering or pain of another person. He can't see that what somebody would look like when they are confused, or what they would look like when somebody is shocked or surprised. He doesn't know what those complex emotions are. And those are the emotions that you need to be able to recognize and understand as a person if you want to make your way through the world, because people are not just straightforwardly happy or sad in any given moment. They are often something else, some range of different things going on simultaneously. That's the most frequent condition people are in. So if you can't detect that, and you don't know what it means, and imagine living your life that way, where you can't actually understand people, where you can only understand people if they're being very, very literal with you and very blunt. But otherwise, you don't actually know what's going on around you, right? So you would be kind of locked in this very rigid, literal thinking, unable to see metaphors. He prefers logic, systems, deduction, like maths is logic and a system. Deduction is being able to generalize something, to understand that if I do this, then this other outcome will reliably always happen forever, right? That's what deduction is. And he does not like to be physically touched as well. When he, beginning of the story, he finds the dog, but he's then noticed as standing there and being the kind of neighborhood weirdo with a dead dog and a fork sticking out of it. And somebody phones the cops turn up, and they find him standing in the dog. So they touch him. They kind of try to get him away from the dog because he does not like touch, and they don't know that he shouldn't be touching him. He freaks out and he hits the police officer, which is a very bad thing to do. So he basically gets taken into the police station for the night. And he isn't really, at no point does he freak out or about that or break down or cry or get emotional or afraid. It's all relayed to us in a very matter-of-fact kind of a way. And so we know straight from the beginning that we're dealing with somebody highly unusual. Speaking of dogs, my poor cat is knocking on my door outside. He wants to come in because the other human has been out this evening, so he's been left all alone. But I think she's coming back now to deal with. He's meowing so so pathetically at the door. He just wants to come into my office or my study here. Poor spark plug. But I think his other employee is about to come home, so it should be okay. Maybe you can hear him meowing in the background. So Christopher, like I said, unusual fellow here. And all of those things I've just told you, all those things that Christopher's unable to do are actually the very same things that a novel as a form is good at revealing and good at working with. Okay. The emotions of characters, inductive thinking, which is when you are able to understand the world, not through rules, but through understanding that things are actually flexible, that things are not generalizable, that things are different according to whatever context or situation they happen in. Using metaphors, seeing things through the eyes of other people, human relations. A novel, especially like this novel, it's not a genre novel, but it's a more kind of serious novel, are also unpredictable systems. They throw things at you that you might not see coming, or which are told to you in an unusual way or from an unusual perspective. All those things that a novel is actually good at doing for us in the way it delivers its content are the very things that Christopher, the narrator, the person who's actually writing the novel, in essence, all those are things he can't do, right? So in a way, we've got a very strange book that is not going to be able to give us the content of a novel the way we are used to getting it, right? The book, in a way, is actually at odds with its own main character. It's not a good fit. The person telling the story should not be the one telling this story because he's actually not capable of giving us a novel, right? But what effect that has is not that the book starts to break down or doesn't make any sense anymore. That's not what happens. It's more that you, the reader, have this heightened awareness that you are reading a book that is quite strange and odd, and that actually what you're doing is reading a book, okay? This is something that you can feel the process of being created. You're aware that the thing in your hands is something kind of odd and strange. It's your discomfort with the book, first of all, mirrors or reflects Christopher's own discomfort in the world. So that's kind of an interesting point of view that, you know, he struggles to understand the world and he feels oddly discomforted in it all the time. Just like when you read the book, you feel the discomfort with your role as the reader in the book. You're not quite sure what you're getting, why you're getting it in this way, or what the point of it is necessarily, right? So in that way, the book is kind of an odd thing. If you look at your learning outcomes, you'll notice that one thing you're expected to know about the book or understand about it is how and in what ways it's what you would call a postmodern novel. Okay, what is meant by this term postmodern? It kind of means what I've just said to you the last couple of minutes. This postmodernism is actually a very kind of complicated thing, and there's a whole history behind it and a whole lot of thinkers, and it's got its whole own philosophy and so on. If you if you survive English all the way into third year, eventually you'll do a module in your second semester of third year called postmodernism, where we just look at it as a theory or as a framework. So for the purposes of this module, I just want to introduce you to the concept broadly speaking, and trying to give you a nice, simple, and usable definition of what something is when it's postmodern, especially in literature, what literary postmodernism is. So to be postmodern, I think the easiest definition of that is that it's a way of thinking and creating that questions traditional ideas by embracing uncertainty, ambiguity, and playfulness. Okay, so it's often something that challenges established beliefs and mixes together different styles or genres, blurs the lines between high art and popular culture. It rejects the idea that there's one truth, that there's one correct way of doing something, and instead believes that reality, this thing we all try to understand every day, every moment, is in fact highly subjective, and our understanding of it is shaped by personal perspectives. You can't really use like mathematics or some other reliable system to work out what's going on. And one person will look at an event or whatever and see something completely different than another person. And we are also compromised, limited by our perception and our senses, which edit things out, lie to us, distort things. Our memories are fickle and unreliable. We often tell stories about events rather than remembering exactly how they happened. And so that means that what we know is actually often very limited. What we claim to know is often inflated. What we claim to know is often actually quite untruthful, because we just don't have the ability to understand or know everything around us. We are not gods. We are imperfect. And we use flawed, limited systems to try and work out what's true, what's real, what's good, what's bad. And those systems themselves are very subjective. Okay? So postmodernism is the recognition of that idea. And again, just to make it even, just try and make it more basic again, we are dealing with literary postmodernism. You get different forms of postmodernism, but we are dealing with literary postmodernism, how to use it for literature. And I would say that the best way to try and understand it is that what it does is try to do things in a new way. It challenges traditional ways of storytelling. And the main feature then of a postmodern novel, any postmodern writing, and I'll write this again in the comments just so you have it down somewhere, is that it's a kind of storytelling that is self-aware. Okay, a postmodern book is aware that it is a book, and it wants to make the reader aware that they are reading a book, that they are reading a story, and a story is a construct, it's a viewpoint, it's a take. It's not the capital T truth. And so a postmodern book will very often, like, kind of like the way you do a mathematical formula, it will show you it's working. It will show you the way it's been written and how it's been made. The choices the writer made will become part of the book, will become part of the story. And so you're very often reminded as a reader that the object you're holding in your hands is actually an object you are holding in your hands. It's not real. It's not true. The events in the story are not true and real. Now you might think, I'm holding the book. I see it's got a cover. I see it's got a writer on it. So there's no mystery that the thing has been created by a person. But the thing is that in order for a story to succeed, you need to believe it. You need to be put under a spell, right? When you watch a movie, for example, you don't see the cameras. You don't see the script. You don't see the director. You don't see the guy holding the sound mic and the boom and the recording equipment. All that stuff is hidden away, right? All those things are hidden away, because if you saw them, it would jar you out of the reality of the story. And so you won't have that very enjoyable thing of being completely engaged in the story, and kind of all your critical faculties have been dissolved away and you're just enjoying the world of the film. That's what it wants to do. Same with the book. A book wants to, in a sense, trick you into believing the truthfulness of the story. It wants to switch off your brain and just make you like sink into the world and enjoy it. Postmodern literature is always trying to remind you that you are sinking into the world and wants you to snap out of it, and will do that by constantly reminding you that the thing you're reading is just a book, okay? And it has all these, here's a whole list of tricks it does in order to achieve the self-awareness. And the narratives will often be, for example, non-linear. So the story will jump around in time. The blurring of genres is pretty common. So you'll have like a detective story in this case mixed in with a family drama style thing. So you're aware of genres are being toyed with. Like I said, we're self-aware. So often the readers will be reminded that they're reading a constructed story. Like when the fourth wall gets broken down in a play or a movie. There'll be, this isn't the case in this story, but there will often be multiple perspectives, different people looking at the same thing and reaching different conclusions. So it heightens the level of possible interpretation. The more interpretation you have, the less formula you can use to work things out, just like in life. There'll be a lot of irony. So people saying things they don't necessarily mean. And the humor will come through in the form of like a playfulness. So the book is, by playful, I mean the writer will, as Mark Haddon does, put pictures in, diagrams, make odd choices, put things in the book you don't expect, things that shouldn't actually be there, because that's not narrative. It's not novelistic to put a picture of a smiley face in a book. But he's playing around. He's being kind of mischievous and not following the rules. So basically, in short, literary postmodernism is something that will do these little experiments with structure, with language, and with form to make us aware that we are reading a story. And when you think about it, that's actually the most honest way you can encounter a story, is if the creator of that thing is also showing you how they made that thing, and also showing you that what you're reading is a viewpoint, it's a take, it's a reality, its authenticity is actually increased by showing you everything about it. If that makes, hopefully that makes some sense, right? So in a weird way, while postmodernism is saying that there is no one single truth, it is also saying that it is using that fact to increase, in a way, the degree of truthfulness in the text that you are dealing with. It's kind of a paradoxical and weird thing. No, okay, we've got 1 minute left. So obviously, we don't have time to do a close reading of these chapters, but it's something I would do in, say, a longer class. So I'm just going to say that for the next few days, if you haven't started reading the book, make sure that you just give yourself a target here, like a page target. I think chapter 17 takes us all the way up to, that's actually super soon in the book. It's only page 11. So I think, just as you read the book, there are things you can pick up as you read along and as you sort of think about what I've been saying in class this evening. So what I want you to do is go back to these pages and look at all the ways in which the book is kind of experimenting or not doing something traditional. In fact, for one thing that's obvious is that it begins right in the middle of events, at the beginning of the story, but then it switches to a different viewpoint, which is still Christopher, but it's him talking, sort of writing these alternate chapters in which he describes his life in a way that's not actually connected to the story, but as you read further and further, the two things begin actually to merge, and they become the part of the same story as we learn more about Christopher's life. So go back and look at all the ways he uses kind of words, and he will often talk about other books and other stories. That's also a very postmodern thing. It's what we would call intertextuality. It's when you mention other texts in the text you're reading. This also came up during Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and so yes, you can say that that movie by Tarantino is also a postmodern movie because it has Quentin Tarantino is a very postmodern film director. So already you've encountered something like this. There's a question here, and we'll wrap it up. Have I marked the ICE tasks? I'm still, the way I do it is that the ICE tasks, except for the first one, they're always about getting you started in the next text, okay, and just getting familiar with it. So all those people have handed in ICE tasks now. I have looked at them. I've checked to see if the work was finished, and as if it is, I give you full marks for that ICE task. And I'm just gonna, I haven't put all the marks into the system yet, but I will in the next couple of days, and I think they'll release the ICE marks. Today is the 16th, and I think they wanted to release them like 21st or something. I think on the 21st they wanted to put it in. So probably next week you'll see your ICE marks. Okay. The POE, oh man, I don't want to tell you the wrong day. I've got these other classes. So if you submitted all 4 yesterday and today, then I will capture those marks and send them off next week. The POE, when is it due? I don't want to say the wrong date. Maybe if somebody else knows what it is, but I think it's the 22nd of November. I think that's right. I don't want to tell you that, and it's actually the 14th or something. But I checked the PAS a while ago, and my brain is telling me the 22nd of November. But that is also the date of another class that hands in for me. So just double check. If you look at your PAS, you'll find your PAS on your side, I think on your student materials, but also somewhere in VC Learn. If you click on like the submission link, it actually gives you the deadline, I believe. So just go, maybe I can check that out now quickly. But yeah, that's all I want to say about the book. So we're done with the lecture for now. If you need to leave, you can. I'll see you again another time. Just remember to carry on reading the book. That's the most important thing. Whatever you do, whether you attend classes or not, whether you understand what I've been saying, doesn't really matter. If you read the book, you will have a really good head start compared to if you don't read the book. Reading the text is the most important thing. So spend the free time you have available to you reading, and you will be very well off. Let me just check and see on my side here. I don't have the PAS document on me, and trying to get it is such a mission. But is it the 22nd of November? Okay, cool. I thought so. My brain is often incorrect, but sometimes gets it right. So the 22nd of November, so you've got about a month left. Just remember, for the POE, of course, you can start right now. Nothing's holding you back. Nothing should be stopping you. But the first question consists of 2 different parts. If you were with us in first semester, you'll know that this is a repeat of what you did then. You take the question you got the lower mark for, and you resubmit it in an improved version in the POE with I think about a 600 to 800 word reflective essay in which you write about the choices that you made, the way you improved it, and some other things besides that. I've had students, even though they did this in first semester, they still came up to me in class and asked me when they need to resubmit their work. not understanding that it's for the POE that they have to resub. So go back to your feedback and see which one you got the lower mark for. Sometimes I did remember to indicate which one it was that you need to resubmit, but that resubmission is for the POE, okay? So don't forget to do that question. And I think what I was always trying to find a way you could improve your work, but some of you did really well, and there isn't that much to improve beyond, say, adding a couple of ideas in there or using a different source for your research. So, you know, and we are still going to do this NSS thing, National Support Workshop, at some point, but I think it's fine if you also write just generally broadly about your experience of English as a module. Like, how have you grown as a student? What else have you read outside of the curriculum? And has your study of literature influenced how you see other movies now, or how you read other books and what you notice or see about them? So if you're struggling for things to say in that reflective essay, don't just sort of BS your way through it. Try and kind of reflect on your development as a student of English as a whole. You have that freedom, you have that space and room to talk about that as well if you want to. But maybe more on that when we do the NSS that we'll do. I'm not sure when. We haven't settled on a date yet, but look out for that. Okay. I'll leave it there for this evening, I think. I'll stay on another minute or so to take any follow-up questions. But otherwise, I wish you guys well, happy reading, and chat soon. Bye-bye.